This is the first of 3 panels today which are focused, don't forget, on process. Now, each of the presentations is going to be about an issue, issues that you may well be fascinated and excited by. But your challenge is to work out what we can learn from these presentations about the process. And for this first one, let me remind you, the focus of this first panel is how do we get agreement on the issue and its cause. So what I've asked each of the presenters to do is to reflect on, they'll obviously have to tell us what the issue is, but the important thing is, how do you get agreement within an organisation to make a change? And that's about the issue. In later panels, we'll look at how you get the solution and then how you monitor the solution. But we really want to try and focus on the process so that the report coming out of today for the conference will be about that. It will be about the process. Okay? I've never tried to do this before with a series of different presentations in a conference. So I'm nervous. But we need to try and make it work. So please bear with me. I'm going to try to chair this fairly tight so that we stay focused on that question. I know you're going to be excited by the issues, but I want to stay focused on the process. I'm going to start with Andy Cooper, if I might.
You might.
Andy has
Thank
5 minutes.
I thought I had 6, Harold, but still. Right, thank you. Good morning, ladies and gentlemen. We will have a microphone problem this morning in the sense that we've got to adjust the microphone height for the different speakers. I have to have especially high microphone height. 6 minutes isn't long to talk about this subject, and just to tell you what I'm going to talk about, it's about community engagement and how tour operators can potentially work with the communities, particularly in destinations. And I'm going to do this more by looking at what we actually do. So I'm going to go a little bit towards Harold's requests and requirements and a little bit off on slight frolic of my own. And I'm sure Harold will pull me back if I move too far down the wrong road. We are moving very much from the macro of the last 2 sessions into the micro of this session. So apologies if it seems quite different to talking about the difference between 2% and 4% global warming. So, community engagement, what does it mean for Thomas Cook? We're, as probably everybody knows, an international business. We're mainly European-based now. And what we are historically not a joined-up business. All the businesses operate separately, all the different countries sell and operate in separate ways. What we're trying to do is make our organisation more coherent and cohesive. To work together and do things in a collective, consistent fashion. One of the ways we're already doing that is in the destinations. We now have, not quite, but we are getting towards the point of having a single team who support all our customers wherever they come from. We will get to that over the course of the next year, and that will make a big difference to how we approach community engagement in all of our destinations. Starting point for us is to say we have a standard on community engagement, which basically says that we are an important part of the communities in which we live and work, and we'll look to support and improve the lives of those who live in those communities. So I'm limiting my discussion today very much to destination communities, the communities in which we work. But there are at the moment, big differences in how we approach this issue. A lot of that is actually culturally driven, in as much as you look at the UK, we do have a culture of customers giving, charitable giving. We don't necessarily have a similar culture in other markets in which we operate, and there's much more of a culture that companies will contribute rather than our customers doing so. So in the UK, 2009, we established the Thomas Cook Children's Charity. The purpose of that was to improve children's lives and benefit the communities in which they live. Much of what we've done has been very UK focused. It's been looking at children, what happens to children in the UK. But we do actually look both at projects in the UK and in destinations as well. The way we do that is actually demand money from our customers. In the past, we've been able to effectively take that money from our customers by an opt-out mechanism, so it's automatically added to the cost of bookings. Sadly, the EU, in its infinite wisdom, has decided that's unfair and unreasonable. And I think a lot of charities are going to start suffering from this as a core problem, in that a move to an opt-in, I think, will see a significant drop in the amount of money that businesses raise for charity. And actually, that will have quite a big impact on charitable giving overall. We are increasingly finding it's better to work with charitable partners rather than directly funding individuals and individual projects. That in itself will create challenges for us going forward, but it has meant that over the years we've been able to fund a mixture and a variety of different activities, both in the destinations in which we operate and also to spread that to other needy areas. In the interest of time, Harold, I'm not going to go through the detail of this. I'm assuming the slides will be available later. But what I've listed up here is a few examples of places where we've actually funded activities, both clearly in destinations, places like Mexico and in Turkey, and in places more widely. We're particularly proud of the work we've done in the Gambia over the years, and my colleague Joe Hendricks, who's sitting in the middle of the room, is probably the person who's driven our organisation to do more over the last 5 years in the Gambia than anybody else. And it's an area where I think we're the largest operator into that destination, so we've recognised the importance of actually doing stuff there. And hopefully done quite a lot to actually help the process and engage with the local communities. And so we've tried to spread that as widely as possible. We do take a slightly different approach in the other markets in which we work. As I mentioned, the Germans work with what I would describe as being the German equivalent of the Travel Foundation. Works slightly differently, but it's an organisation called For Tourists. And I've just given another example there where we've actually said, let's support a local community in a particular project, develop or rekindling a dying industry to try and encourage that industry to survive, and then actually use the work we've done to get our customers to go and look at it. And I think for us, the big win of that is actually saying not only you're engaged in the community, you're engaging your customers clearly as well. You're engaging the staff in having interest in the project, so you actually then becomes a virtuous circle. Similarly, we've been doing projects in Northern Europe, funded by our airline in Northern Europe. We've been building a library for a school in a particular instance I've quoted there, and then equipping that library. This has led to a massive benefit in terms of engagement of our staff in the community, our staff in Northern Europe, in that they're now engaged in the whole Christmas present process. They've been collecting Christmas presents for the kids in the school, got them clearly involved in the whole process of what's happening. The airline crew, when they operate to Thailand, a lot of them actually go and visit this project and see what's happening. And then the company itself has also been making contributions to this project directly by supplying our computer equipment. So, as I've said, the major benefit of our approach, very simply, and I know my time is up, so we'll finish in the next 20 seconds. The major benefit of our approach we see as a threefold one. It engages our employees and demonstrates to them they're actually doing something. It engages the communities and provides some form of payback. It's a drop in the ocean, but at least we're doing something to pay back the communities in which we work, and gets our customers interested in the subject. So from our perspective, we see all of this as very important to us as an organisation, and something we believe that the industry should be doing more of. So with no further ado, I will finish hopefully more or less within the time.
You were indeed, Andy. Thank you very much. We're going to hear a very different example now from Paul Britton of Thompson Cruises. He took my breath away with this example. I'll be really interested to see your response. Remember, we're interested in the process. Not to reopen the carbon debate, we're interested in the process. Paul.
Thank you. Well, I'd like to start off very quickly by introducing Thompson Cruises. Not many people realise we're Britain's third biggest cruise line, and we've got 5 cruise ships carrying 250,000 passengers a year to more than 160 ports of call. Sorry, I've been told to face the back because otherwise you can't hear me, so I can't do my usual pointing at the screen. I'll just have to wave in general. So in the summer we go mainly to the Mediterranean, but also to Northern Europe, and in the winter we head out to the Caribbean, but also around the Canaries and a little bit in the Med as well. I came into the shoreside business in 2011. I think I must be perfectly suited for senior management, because I've just heard today, of course, that all senior managers are psychopaths, and I decided to get off my ship in Barbados and come and work in Luton. So there we go. And when I came in, my job title is Marine Operations Manager, and a very important part of my role from the start was sustainability. And in general, I'm probably being a little bit overly critical, but the attitude of the management within Thompson Cruises is we'd like to be sustainable, but we probably can't quite get there. It's expensive, there's no real benefit to it. If we try and save fuel, we're going to reduce the customer experience, and customer satisfaction is absolutely key. Our ships are older compared to other companies. We can't possibly be anywhere near as good as they are, and nobody is really interested. So I did have quite a task on my hands to try and convince people, A, we can do something, and B, we should do something. So the way I went around it is basically give them all of the details that you can possibly need. Show them that there's money to be made in sustainable development. As I said, give them all of the details, make it easy to make the right decision. Realise that small things can add up to a big difference. You don't need to change the world in one day, but if you change the world in lots of little steps, you can easily get there. But sustainability does not necessarily equal worse. It obviously equals better for the environment, for the local communities, but it can also be better for the passengers and better for the profit margin as well. And start with the things that we're best at. So the thing that I'm best at has always been itinerary planning, so that's where I started. This is a typical Thompson cruise. You should be able to just about see the size of the text at the back. It's a quick run around the Mediterranean, 7 nights, starting from Palma and going back to Palma, seeing some really great ports. And the first thing that I did when I joined the company was put together a new spreadsheet. Before, to plan an itinerary, we basically drew some dots, worked it all out, and had to start from scratch each time. Putting this together gave me a real tool that I can make instant decisions. So here we can have a look through and we can see straight away there's a highlighted orange. The ship's going 17 knots between Toulon and Barcelona. That's not a good thing. We can slow that down a bit. Barcelona, we're there from 8 in the morning till 5 in the evening. Why do we need to arrive at 8 in the morning? There's not many tours. We don't need to get people off too early. We can actually delay that a little bit. So let's start at 9 in the morning and let's give the passengers the same amount of time in port. So let's say 9 till 1800. And what we can instantly see there is what difference that's made. So I'll flick backwards and forwards between it. So at the moment, our fuel budget ends with, it originally ended 8,062. It's now got 7,500. So we've actually saved about £500. It might not sound like too much, but we're doing this every week, and we've got 5 ships, so it makes a difference. Our kilograms of CO2 per passenger, well, that's dropped by 200 grams per passenger night. Not all that much, you might think. Well, that's more than a kilo per cruise. We've got 1,500 passengers. That's almost 2 tonnes, just by that small 1 hour change in the itinerary. And so now we can take into account a huge number of different factors. The optimum speed of the engines. Howell's particular favourite is the prevailing winds and currents. We now try and avoid going against the wind, and instead we flow with it. I'm not going to go through all of those because otherwise I'll never get to the end, but you'll be able to see them if you download the presentation afterwards. And so here are some of our new cruises. That was just one change. We've actually made quite a few differences. So we've moved from 2 itineraries like that. We've actually got, apart from one of them, all the same ports, but they're in a much more efficient order. Down in the Canaries, we were going to Agadir every week. About half of our passengers really like it, the other half really hate it. So we decided, let's go for a really controversial solution and go there every 2 weeks instead. We've cut out 2 hugely high-speed runs, going all the way out to Agadir and all the way back. We're only doing it half as often, so it's made a really big difference. In fact, just between those 2 changes for one ship, that's added up to £400,000 per year and about 2,500 tonnes of CO2. And there's the results, because I'm out of time.
Paul, I'm really impressed when I see the thing the second time, but I was. Thank you very much. We're going to go now to Sally.
Morning, everyone. Many of you won't have heard of People and Places. We're a small organisation that operates in a real niche part of our travel industry. We send self-funding volunteers to work with local communities. Little bit of badge wearing here. We are recognised because we won't keep our mouths shut. We work in a part of the industry that's bedevilled by bad practice, and we work with some of the most vulnerable people in the world. And we started People and Places to campaign for change, and we did it through demonstrating best practice. I'm going to talk about child protection today. First of all, as far as I'm concerned, there's no argument. We send tourists, we send people to visit countries where there are children. and it is our responsibility to do what we can for child protection. Hell yes, it's our responsibility. And those of us that haven't got that yet, makes me cross. It's time for change. And our local partner in South Africa said it better than me. Absolutely, it's time for change. We have to start questioning how and what we're selling as a volunteer experience. It creates a shared humanity, or it destroys the most vulnerable. And it does destroy the most vulnerable. So we need to change. But in order to change, we need to learn. We've learned a lot. We've been working, we placed our first volunteer in 2006. And this is specific to child protection, but it's also pertinent to a lot of our work. We have to be really careful about the message that we give people. Child protection is not just about pedophilia. Good intentions are not enough. Child labour is really complex. There are bad people out there. We need to work together. Doing the right thing doesn't always feel right. And bottom line, if you can't do it in your own country, why do you think you can go to somebody else's country and do it? In our marketing, let's stop photographs of people hugging children. Let's stop packaging children. Let's stop taking the pictures of those cute kids. One of the things we learnt was choose what volunteer project you're interested in. One of our categories was working with children when we first started. Our volunteers aren't allowed to work with children. We changed that name, that simple message of saying to volunteers, you can go and hug a baby. Wrong. These messages, those subliminal messages, they're wrong. This one, is this about the children or is it about the volunteer? Children have rights. They have a right to be safe. They have a right to be protected from inappropriate bonding. Orphanage tourism. That so many volunteer organisations, and indeed some travel companies, allow tourists to go and engage with vulnerable children for short periods of time is just wrong. It's immoral. One of the things that we learned was that through our work and our learning with organisations like ECPAT and Save the Children and Child Concern, and we know we don't have orphanages in the UK, we've learned that it's better for children to be in a family environment. We do not work with orphanages, and we made a lot of noise last year about working with orphanages. We do work with community programs that seek to support the family to keep their children in their community. We must have policies. Good intentions are not enough. We have to back to responsibility. It's one thing for us to say we're responsible. What action are we going to take? And how are we going to drive ourselves to make that happen? We have to be brave. Really importantly, we have to work in partnership. We work with an organisation called Responsible 100. We have to measure our performance. I've said child labour is complex. I'm running out of time, so it will be. Due diligence is more important than ever. The codes direct us to do the work we should do. But most importantly, and what I want to say all of us to think about today, we need to work together. We made a lot of noise. I spent a lot of time talking with an organisation I hugely respect, and Responsible Travel had the courage to stand up. Their voice is much louder than ours, and they had the courage to stand up and do something about this. It's our responsibility. And there's a resource list at the end. Thank you.
Thanks very much indeed, Sally. We're going to go to responsibletravel.com.
Great, thanks. Hello, everyone. Justin from responsibletravel.com. We're an online travel agent specialising in responsible tourism. To start with, I'd like to talk about where do issues come from? How do we discover the issues we need to address? And we, like all businesses, have a network of relationships and stakeholders. Ours is perhaps not typical of an online travel agent in that our close relationships and networks include activists and NGOs, the ICRT and alumni, the media and customers, and outriders, crazy people who think things that others don't and are outside the norm. And this creates a sort of noise. This is our sensing pad for what is happening in the industry and issues that we might seek to address. One of the issues which came through very loud and very clear last year, and very passionately, was the issue of orphanage volunteering. And if you've heard Sally and Kate speak about this, you'll understand that it creates a very quick realization this is something serious that needs to be addressed. So we were alerted to this issue. We looked into it. It didn't take long, to be honest, to recognize that we, as sellers of volunteering holidays, including many orphanage volunteering trips, had an issue that we needed to address, and we needed a new set of criteria. Now, I'm not an expert in child protection, so we found some people who were. We created a working group, included people and places, Friends International, Save the Children, ECPAT, Harold, and Daniela, who I think is an outrider or someone who thinks perhaps outside the norms. And we pulled together a new set of guidelines which would determine what we would sell and what we would not sell. Now, that actually turned out to be an extremely tough set of guidelines. The result of that, when we went into consultation with our suppliers, is that we removed and stopped selling 43 trips, some of which were good sellers, some of which were great sellers. There were tough conversations with our suppliers that we would no longer sell those trips. Having got our house in order, we then took the campaign to the public domain. And I posted a blog, and 2 days it got 1,000 likes. I had some extraordinary letters from orphans, from people who'd worked in orphanages, from visitors of orphanages, and they had what I would describe as an aha moment. It was, I did that, it felt right, or it felt slightly odd. Now you bring it to my attention. Okay, I get it. It's wrong. We then took the campaign beyond that, and it generated a lot of press, trade press, as well as consumer press, all the way around the world. But it was our decision to stop selling orphanage volunteering that I think drew their attention. I'd like to talk a little bit about activism. This is essentially us cleaning up what we sell in our supply chain. Orphanage volunteering, we consider very carefully what we sell. We choose it very carefully. But what do we do when we see issues in our industry that we are not involved in that cause the industry and us concern? Do we stand by? Do we do nothing? Is it just NGOs that should campaign for change? Well, I don't believe it is. I believe that business should campaign for change as well. And I think expectations of business have changed. Business has to play a positive role in society, not just generate profits for its shareholders. So what's coming up on our radar? What will be our next campaigns? What are our stakeholder groups telling us they feel is very important? Well, a couple of areas we'll be looking at and campaigning around. In the next week or so, we'll be campaigning around the practice of keeping cetaceans, orcas, dolphins in captivity in small tanks to perform tricks for tourists. I believe that's wrong. You may have seen the Daily Mail yesterday that SeaWorld were forced to reveal that they that the orchids have Valium, are given Valium to reduce their anxiety. They're drugged, basically. The second area that is coming through very strongly from our networks is the issue around the local economic benefits of cruise ships. And so that's something that we'll be looking towards in the future. And finally, map time. Thanks.
Thanks very much, Justin. The final presentation is actually going to be about labour conditions.
It is. Yeah. Okay, so thanks very much. I'm used to kind of delivering 45-minute lectures, so this is going to be a bit tough, I suppose. But I'll try and get through as quickly as possible, but still not forgetting the key points I wanted to make. So I have to say in advance that although I am going to focus on working conditions, I hope the lessons we're going to take away from this are applicable across tourism. So you can apply them to the management and capture of carbon and those kind of things. It's about human working conditions. It's about social inclusion and human rights. So, there's a broader lesson to be learned in what I'm saying. So, very briefly, I want to highlight a study that was conducted quite a few years ago, and it bewailed the kind of working conditions in tourism and hospitality industry. So, this is 1983. This was Japan. Question is, 30 years later, has anything changed? Has anything changed at all? We'd imagine it has, with all the focus on CSR. But because time is limited, these are just 3 examples of different people and organisations, international organisations, that are still saying, well, actually, it doesn't look like that much has changed in the last 30 years in terms of working conditions in the industry. I'm not sure if you're all aware, you probably are, that just last week, Tourism Concern launched or published its report on all inclusives. One of the key findings was that the sector was characterised by precarious work, low wages, long working hours, unequal opportunity. You could have said the same thing 30 years ago, really. So the question is, well, why hasn't anything changed, or why has very little changed, and what can we do about it? They were specifically focusing on all-inclusives, which, the problems were even more dramatic, really. So the picture is anything from rosy, so it's far from rosy, but as Simon was alluding to earlier on in his presentation, I think there is a growing awareness in society that, business is not always good, and the interests of business sometimes don't focus on all the stakeholders in society, and that if we only focus on profit, we're actually not pursuing a goal that is socially acceptable in many cases. And we've had this for a number of years. Stakeholder theory was first really elaborated on in the 1980s, but things are, in society overall, particularly after the credit crunch, I would suggest that people are becoming more aware of the issues around the social responsibilities of business, not least also because of climate change, of course, which we discussed earlier on. So, and of course, exemplary employers do exist. It's very easy to tar all employers with the same brush, and I'm probably talking to converted. People who've made it here, for the conference yesterday and today are probably amongst the good apples, but there are plenty out there that aren't so good that we need to talk about. Okay, but certainly not all doom and gloom. So, on the one hand, we do need to raise awareness, but I think we also need to be very clear that we need to take that next step. Raising awareness is one thing, and I think awareness is probably quite high now. At least it is higher than it was. But what do we need to do to change behaviour, to change people's behaviour, but also to change our behaviour? Okay. So just very short term, I'm just going to highlight Kotter's work on change management. Now, many of you have probably come across this. The reason I highlight it here is we have got a lot of theory, we have got practical examples of what works. Okay, so although in tourism, coming from this as a tourism academic, we often ignore the work that's been done in other fields, particularly in the broader area of business. But there are lots of lessons out there, there are lots of models that we can apply to our industry. We just need to look a bit wider than outside the tourism literature. One of the key lessons that the vast majority of the literature says we need to do, if you want to improve a business's corporate social responsibility behaviour, is you need to focus on the people at the top. Okay? Don't forget the people at the bottom, but without buying from the top, you're not going to succeed. And I've just included a little quotation there. I noticed that Simon also mentioned Ghoshal in his earlier presentation. I won't read the entire thing. Very often, people at the top say, well, my hands are tied, we've got to make this much profit, shareholders will be upset otherwise, I'm out of a job. But in a way, isn't that just acknowledging then that you're powerless, you cannot make decisions? You must, as a CEO or CFO, have some responsibility to make decisions that perhaps aren't that palatable, in the first instance, but that are good for the social good in the long run. So, looking now at the universities, because I don't want to forget, we focus a lot on businesses, but we also need to focus on universities, is social dialogue. This is obviously something that's being promoted by the trade unions, employees, employers and government. And I've put "and others." And I think universities, higher education institutions, need to be included in that. We need to work together with industry. So educating the next generation of leaders, and I think this is kind of what Simon was alluding to. I hadn't, seen his presentation, but in a way I'm quite happy that there is that degree of overlap. So we need to invest in education in the areas of responsibility, business ethics, sustainability, call it what you want. Education for sustainable development, as defined by UNESCO. I've highlighted attitudes and values. It's not just about technical knowledge, how do we measure the impact? It's about personal values, human values. What does it mean to be in business today? And just on Wednesday, I was at another conference, and this term of holistic pedagogy was mentioned. So I thought I'd mention that today because it's very fitting. It's about educating the whole person. Again, it's going beyond professionalism. It's also thinking about, what values do we hold, as a society. So in sum, because my time's running out, I would say, we need to continue to work with industry. I really wanted to make that message because I realised that a conference like this, I'm probably talking to the converted, really, preaching to converted, but I wanted to let you know, this is a really important job you're doing. Don't give up, don't become disheartened. And finally, for us as educators, well, me and the other academics in the room, we need to really focus not solely on the technical skills, but also in inculcating certain, responsible values in our students, because they're the next generation of leaders that will hopefully make our lives easier and more responsible in the long run. And I need a drink now. Thanks very much.
If I may, I'll thank the speakers on your behalf. We've run slightly over, but we've still got 22 minutes for your contribution. So this is your 22 minutes. You have to come out and use the microphone. Could the next person who wants to talk after Richard? Richard, you can talk for 20 minutes by the look of it. No, don't. Please be sharp.
Which way do you want me to look? Do I have to find the camera? Okay. Yeah, I'm Richard Denman from the tourism company. We're consultants. Harold, I think this is going to be a question about process, but do correct me if I'm wrong. And it is actually directed at Andy. Where are you? Here you are. I've done a bit of work on opt-out and opt-in in the past, and I think you're absolutely right that if you do go into an opt-in rather than an opt-out, you're going to lose quite a lot from this process. I suppose the answer then is, can you simply, as a company, do the opting yourself in the sense that you actually say, we're going to give a certain amount to this charitable activity when you make this booking? Now, presumably the problem with that is that you then have to add that to the price that you make visible. And the question is, how much do you have to increase the price by to do that process yourself? And do you know how much that will actually affect loss of sales by doing that? So it's a fairly practical question, but that seems to be the logic of the process.
One of the things that always interests me about these conferences is there's a whole thing of the fundamental interconnectedness of all things. And I think that the point you're raising there about pricing ties in, I think, very much with Andreas's last point and indeed Kevin's earlier point about cost of holidays generally. To answer your direct question, Richard, I think in practice to do it, at the moment we're talking of a £2 per booking donation that we ask customers to opt into. So if you did a simple replacement, you would add £2 onto the cost of the holiday. You can't do a simple replacement because effectively you've then got to start thinking about VAT and other impacts on that. So in practice, you're probably talking about £5 a booking to go on to deliver the right number. Whether you would ever actually achieve that, I don't know, but that's the sort of number you're probably talking of. You then immediately start to run into this whole debate about the once you're doing that, if the customer says, well, I don't support your charity, do you then have to find a way of allowing them to take it off, which I think gets messy. So in practice, it becomes a hard one to try and do. But it actually got me thinking, and when I was listening to Andreas, it was something that probably not quite to prolong the discussion, but it's something that made me start to think, well, actually, our argument on this as an industry has always been about the whole question of sort of making sort of people receive more, or allowing hotel workers to have higher wages. It's because we are screwing them as tour operators, allegedly, although I would deny that. We are forcing rates down because we are getting customers to book. Actually, the whole question stems from the customer's willingness to pay more for their holiday. If they were willing to pay more for their holiday, then you wouldn't have the question of hotel rates being forced to be low to try and deliver that product. So, and I think all of these questions do tie together, and actually we are in a very competitive market. The education probably needs to come back to responsible customers to actually get them to say, I will pay more for a holiday. Then you start to come into interesting questions about social inclusion. Does that mean that there will be some people who will be entirely excluded from the opportunity to take the holiday they would otherwise want to book? So all of those things I think do tie together to actually say, well, yeah, ideally we would probably like to put the extra money on and make the donation ourselves, as happens in our German and Swedish markets, where there's the expectation the company will make the charitable donation rather than the customer. The advantage, I think, of the customer actually doing it is you get a level of engagement from the customer from actually doing it that you might lose if we're just putting money in the pot. You can promote that, but it's not the same as the customer saying to the customer, you give us money, we will deliver X, and we will work to deliver X in the destination. I think that is a strong message that we ought to use, and it does resonate with customers. So, but I do think that the bigger question is saying, are our customers able and willing to pay more for holidays? Should we be making them? And what is the overall impact of doing that? And does that then impact on the destinations as well? Sorry to be long-winded in answering that, but I think that that's probably where the whole root of this issue goes to.
Thanks, Andy. Is there another question from the floor? Andreas, can I ask you to reflect on... I mean, you introduced some theory about the making of change. Do you want to reflect on that theory and apply it to these 4 cases?
Okay. Right, on the spot. Very good. I'm an academic. I reflect. It takes time. It doesn't. It just kind of, you know.
Andreas, as you well know, the world is running out of time.
I think what I'll do is take the opportunity that you've given me by finishing off, really, but it does tie into what you were saying. I think it's very important. I mean, industry tries things out, okay, and I think it's the higher education's role to help industry try things out and learn from what's worked and what hasn't. And I think, you know, we as educators can play a role there. You know, educating our students. We need the research. You know, we want to do the research. Let's work with industry to try to apply some of these theories in practice. Some of the best insights that we get come from industry. Okay, I can't remember the name of the article, but it was a sociologist, quite an eminent sociologist, in 2005, wrote something along the lines of, you know, research in academia, we can forget it because companies have all the data these days. You know, we're after data, but it's actually the companies that have the data. You have the examples, you have access to that information that we need to try to analyse, to look at, to explore, to understand, well, what can we do better? You know, what works and what doesn't fundamentally. But I would like to come back to, you know, Andy's point. I do think, but you're probably surprised that I'm saying this as an academic, but I do think that the consumer is sometimes let off quite rightly, and you know, we should include ourselves. You know, I include myself, you know, as a consumer, and I'm waffling on a bit. There's lots of things I'd like to say. So, but in terms of education, there's a growing kind of imperative to focus only on the economic. It's all about trying to get students into jobs. And while I appreciate that, I think, this sometimes referred to as quaint notion of liberal education, I think there's a lot of value in liberal education, and I don't mind saying that. And I think, educating people at university to think beyond the very limits of just, making a quick buck is incredibly important, not just for the people going into industry, but for consumers too, and the choices they make. So those were some points that I wanted to make, and thank you for the opportunity you've given me, Howard. I'm not sure they...
You better sit down now. Is there anybody else on the panel who would like to reflect on what other people said? Justin. I think you had a question about that, Harold. I'll go to that next. Justin first, and then we'll go to the question. Thanks, Andy.
Yeah, what to say? I think Thomson Cruises, that's great. I think what you've done is really, really great, really innovative. And I think innovation and entrepreneurship have a role in creating change. So well done with that. I also think people get out of bed thinking about two things really in change, either risk or opportunity. I get out of bed thinking I want to make the world a better place. I don't think about managing down my risk. I think about creating change, and as an entrepreneur, that's the way I approach it. It's perfectly valid for others in organisations with different expectations to manage down risk. But for me, it's all about changing the world.
Both. Oh, both. Okay. Okay. My question's for Paul. My question's for Paul. You've messed around with the itinerary and you've made it better. Now, where do you go from here? I'm wondering if it's within your remit to look at like supply in the ports of call that you go to, and is that going to be a hard one to get past the board?
Enough for another one. Obviously, some things are a law of diminishing returns, that there's some arguments you can very easily make and say, if we do this small action, we'll get this big benefit, and eventually you work down through all of the actions that are that way, and you start getting actions that you have to take big actions, and you get a small benefit. Ports are somewhat outside of my remit. We are doing work with ports, for example, on recycling, on volunteering opportunities for our crews and so forth, and obviously with our excursions as well. But yes, there's loads of things we can do, and there's quite a few that we are doing, but every day I'm probably frustrated by there's another thing that I would love to do, and there's just something that's holding me back. But eventually we will get there. We'll go through all the way. The first presentation today was quite interesting for me as to whether we could actually get to that. Let's start with the 40% reduction. I think it's probably possible. The 90%, that's more tricky.
Please come down. Is there someone else with a question after this?
Thank you, Harold. Which one is it? It's both? Okay. I'll step to the side. Simon Ledbetter, Blue and Green Tomorrow, a sustainable wealth magazine. Der Spiegel produced an article in 2010 that basically demonstrated that for every pound of real world trade, 26 pounds is traded financially. So if our global economy is a grape, then wealth and investment is basically a grapefruit, and a very big grapefruit. About 3% of that investment is actually invested sustainably or responsibly, and the dial isn't moving. It's pretty stuck at 3%. Our world is being shaped by what people invest in, not by actually what we consume. I would be curious to know how you are engaging with actually the real elephant in the room, which is that 26 times the size of our economy, financial trade market.
Financial investors look at lots of things when they look at a business. One of the things they look at is business risk. And one of the ways in which they seek to ensure the business they're investing in are managing their risk is through wide stakeholder engagement and consultation. They basically believe that businesses who have that engagement will spot and identify issues before they seriously hurt them. They also believe that those businesses may prosper more greatly. You know, all the people at this event, all the tour operators at this event, including the publicly listed tour operators at this event, are better prepared for the future than those who are not at this event. They will see the future more clearly, they will see the problems, and they will adjust accordingly. So there are others probably better placed, listed companies here better placed, but good investors will look at a CSR policy as part of their investment criteria. If you want good investment ratings, if you want to be a successful business, get with stakeholder engagement and get with CSR.
Thanks, Justin. Is there anybody else with a question? Just one. You have to come out for it.
Yeah, I'm Valette Jolly from Vision on Sustainable Tourism and Travel Mall. I was at a meeting a couple of years ago about working practices in hotels, and I was absolutely gutted by what was going on. It was the Olympic year, and I'd imagined that if you went into one of the five-star hotels, you get people that gave you the welcome, looked after you. They'd been there for years. Their fathers had been there. But not at all. Most of the people that work in hotels in London, not in Gambia or wherever, in London, in five-star hotels, were often being paid less than the minimum rate. They were looking at, the chambermaids were looking after like 30 rooms a day. I mean, it was scandalous. And nobody said a word about it. Where was the Daily Mail? Where was the Daily Mirror? Where was any of the media? Nobody said. Now, I also, in my position, I also know there's a lot of stuff like that goes on in the travel industry, and nobody says a word.
One of the things which I think came out very clearly from several of the presentations is the importance of having the evidence to raise the issue. And the orphanage story, which we heard, is a good example of that. And I suspect, as I said last night in my inaugural, that the issue of labour conditions in hotels is going to become an issue, not just because of what happens in travel and tourism, but because people are raising it from a completely other point of view, which is the subsidy which goes from taxpayers to fund the wages of people in employment in hotel companies. That issue will be raised. Can we go on to the next question? Please make it a question and not a long statement.
I'll try. Wiebke, working for a business in the community. I'm interested in the commercial opportunities in changing how the industry works. And we've had good examples of what can be done, giving back to community, disassociating from suppliers, and changes in energy efficiency. I think I'm quoting Harold, maybe not, with the point that the size of the problem seems to be increasing faster than the size of the solution that we're trying to find. The tourism industry seems to be based on high volume, low margin. Is that sort of conundrum something that, from a commercial perspective again, is not to be united with responsibility, or do you see opportunities to go beyond incremental changes and towards more transformational changes? Thank you.
Yeah, sure. Sure. I'm afraid, Andreas, it's one for you. And it's a two-part question. The first one is, should academics continue just to do research and publish papers about this, or should academics become activists in the way that other people become activists? It's always a controversial issue in academia, but do we just stand on the sidelines writing papers, or do we actually engage with industry and start to make sure some of that knowledge goes into industry and we try and affect some change as agents of change? Secondly, I think you talked before about the subsidy issue. I think that's important. One of the other things I think we should be challenging hotels on is the quality of service to customers. Because I stayed in a hotel in London last week, fabulous staff, they were fantastic. They were being paid next to nothing, but they were great. Worked really hard, but they couldn't speak to me in English. And therefore I couldn't speak to the chambermaid, the person couldn't understand the order for a poached egg on toast in the morning, and that is absolutely not their fault. And I thought maybe it's because they're new. One of the members of staff had been in the country for 5 years, and their employer had done nothing about improving their level of English. A, so they become very embarrassed. It's very embarrassing for them as employees not to be able to perform. And secondly, if hotels tell me all the time that they're interested in quality of service, if I can't talk to people, it's not a quality of service I'm actually enjoying. So I think service is the other element, because if you have better staff, if you train them better, you look after them better, you treat them better, I genuinely believe you will have better quality of service as well. And we pay enough in London. Sorry.
Andreas, I'm going to come to you first, and then we'll go back across the panel for each person to have a final comment. Please focus on process where you can, and then we'll close.
Okay. So very, sorry, God, not sure which one. Very stereo. Right, very briefly, very briefly. I mean, to your second point, John. Yes. So I agree with you definitely, and I agree with what Valère was saying earlier on. I mean, in terms of working conditions, I think we're still playing a catch-up game there in raising people's awareness of that. Clearly, perhaps the most important thing is the climate and climate change, but we shouldn't just focus on that. I mean, there are other aspects of responsibility rather than just environmental. So I'm not saying, ignore the environment. Clearly, we do need to do something about that, but let's not forget the other aspects. To your first question about the role of academics. Well, I can only speak from my own position. I think from what I said, hopefully it's become very clear that I feel. I don't want to be personally just, writing my papers that maybe two or three other academics across the world will read. I mean, I would very much like to engage in research that has practical outcomes and makes the, not meaning this in a glib way at all, makes the world a better place. And that's why I've come to this conference, and that's why I really recognise that, the work that's been done here and been done at Leeds Met, really. So I hope that's succinct. Thank you.
Me? Okay. I think that a couple of things. Simon's talk this morning. I think all of us need to be really critical with ourselves about what responsible means and what responsibility means and how we, as individuals, take responsibility. And then the other thing that's really important for me, we cannot do that in isolation. We have to work together. And that academics, NGOs, activists, entrepreneurs, the large companies, we have to work together. And we need to start being positive about what we love rather than simply slamming what we hate.
Thank you. I certainly agree with the comments that effectively our staff are our greatest asset, and it is so important to treat them right. And it is probably the most ignored pillar of sustainability. Everybody talks about local communities. Everybody talks about the environment. Very few people really talk about staff. It's something that's had a lot of focus in my particular industry, in the cruise industry. We've got a lot more regulation, and we're very proud of our staff. I mean, in our company, we've got a staff retention rate of about 87 to 90%, and we're really proud of them. And we know that without them, we've got no chance of attracting passengers back, which is vital to the business. And I guess that links on to the other question about small margin businesses, which is it does obviously place a huge constraint on us. There are some things that we can do, there are some things that we can't do. For example, adding £2 onto the price of every holiday is probably not going to make much difference to what people are actually going to pay, because if we add £2 on and Thomas Cook don't, then everyone will go to Thomas Cook until we put our prices down by £2. And so it's not quite often as simple as let's just add an extra pound here, an extra pound there to pay for these things. It's got to come from the consumers.
Thanks very much. Andy.
I think I would just want to echo that final point, actually, that ultimately it is consumers that pay for the solutions in one shape or form. So we've got to find a means of engaging them, making them aware of the issue. And it's all very well conferences like this, engaging a small group of academics and those who are actually interested in the subject. We've got to take this message to a much wider audience. And one of the things, and coming back to the earlier question, the extent to which the big guys can do this, the big plus we've got is we engage with a hell of a lot of people. So we have a great opportunity to engage widely, and I think that the big issue is to make sure there is wide engagement on this subject and we get as many people involved as possible.
Yeah, I think there are two questions. One, should academics be activists? If you're not, I don't know what the point of view is, to be honest. You know, I mean...
Really egregiously, but that means probably there's not much point in most academics at the moment.
Well, I agree with that too. I mean, you know, you're there to study and provide objective information, but to what point? You know, why? Well, so we can create change. So you're activists, basically. And the second question was about, you know, the large-scale tourism industry. You know, I think an all-inclusive holiday could be, from a big tour operator, could be highly, highly, highly responsible. You know, I just don't draw divisions around size. They're not all, you know, but there's a lot of small tourism that's pretty rubbish as well in terms of responsibility. So, yeah, I think we can all get with the programme.
I'm tempted to say that's an unsatisfactorily optimistic position. I'm a glass half empty kind of a person, Justin. I know. We'll continue with these conferences to try and fill up the glass. Can I just thank the panel on your behalf? Thank you very much indeed. Thank you. I want to introduce Elise. I won't embarrass you this time. I am simply stunned and amazed by what they achieved with TUI Netherlands, and really pleased that we were able to recognise the achievement. But let's hear from you.
Thank you, Harold. Hello, everybody. I'm sorry for my Denglish or whatever comes out of me. I think you will get the point what I'm trying to say. I'm very happy to be here to talk to you about child sex tourism. It's not a daily topic of discussion, but it's everyday reality for a lot of children and youngsters worldwide. And that's why I would like to speak on their behalf. Of course, the issue of child sex tourism has been addressed for many, many years, but has the situation changed already? Harold asked me today to speak to you about the responsibilities of the tour operators or the tourism industry regarding child protection. And I would like to share my thoughts, my experience in working on this issue for more than 10 years. So what's the problem? Hundreds of thousands of children and youngsters are involved in child sex tourism. In some countries it happens more than in others. It's worldwide. It's here in the UK, it's in the Netherlands, but in these countries, in green, it happens more often. Child sex tourism is quite easy. It's about supply and demand, and you have to try to stop them both. The supply comes from children who didn't get the opportunity to be born in another situation. They are in a poor background with no possibilities to try to get out of their situation. So we have to try to change that part. And it's about demand, this guy. It's not only about pedophilia sex tourist, pedophile sex tourist. It's also about tourists who just have sex with youngsters who are out of puberty. Most of the time it's the 14, 15, 16. You cannot see how old they are. But what we noticed within large companies like TUI is, what I guess is that we have guessed young groups of young boys in their 19, 20, 21. They just have fun in a destination and they meet up with this nice girl, and in the end she suddenly asks for money. He didn't know. And that's also still child sex tourism if she's not 18 years old. The good thing is, tourism is not the cause of child sex tourism, but we provide the facilities. They are they sit on our planes, they are in our hotels. Thus, the tourism industry plays an important role in the prevention of it. And the good thing is we have the Child Protection Code, but I also have, is a Child Protection Code enough for a tour operator? If we fulfill the 6 criteria, are we there? I don't think so. However, what can we do? In my opinion, signing the code. I have my doubts sometimes about the code, but I'm happy it's there, but it should be better. And last years it became better. In the Netherlands, we were the first tour operator to sign the code. In 2002, it took many years before another tour operator signed. Now, in the last years, finally you see more people sign, but signing is really not enough, according to me. What we need is big projects, big campaigns. I can maybe tell you as a large tour operator, oh, that's possible, but I'm quite small. TUI Netherlands is quite small in comparison to TUI UK or TUI Germany. So as a present here, I'm probably a small tour operator in comparison to the UK market. But I would like to share more what we did and what I think is a big project and a big campaign. And the process behind it. Like Harold would like me to tell you more about it. We signed the code. After 6 years, in 2008, I really had, oh my, come on, is this it? I want to do something big. I really would like to change. I would like to save only 1 kid in my life from this informal sector. So what I saw an opportunity to get some money. And you had to create a supply chain project. So I wrote to all my network with all child rights organizations, I would like to set up a project in Brazil. Who would like to join me? It's that easy. Just send out an email. And 1 reaction, only 1 from an NGO. And it was Plan Netherlands, the perfect partner. You only need 1 reply, of course. But this is the perfect partner, and it took us 2 years to get all these stakeholders in. It took us 2 years, blood, sweat and tears, mutual trust and friendship. You need friendship. To create the best project and to receive the funding, 1.7 million euros. We got it for free. But the thing is, it's a public-private partnership, so TUI should also add something in. But we don't have money, like all the other tour operators. We don't have it, but I'm very creative in creating money. We put in 100,000 euros in kind. It's tickets, flight tickets. It's complimentary rooms. It's adds it's just space in our communication, and then it adds up to 100,000. It's easy to do, easy. The focus of this project is to protect the youth in upcoming tourism destinations. What we are not trying to do is a project where we cannot make the difference. We are not going to Rio in Brazil and trying to solve the problem over there of child sex tourism. No, we went to upcoming tourism destinations and tried to keep it out. That's easier. And then people say, yeah, we don't notice anything. No, that's the good part. You should not notice anything. Not our clients, at least. This is what a project is. I think you can see, when I saw this picture for the first time, most likely that's the girl I was focusing on. This is my girl. It's worth 1.7 million euros. This picture, we changed her life. So it's about vocational training in hospitality for over 500 youth, but also job enrollment. We try to give them a practical place in a hotel and that they can stay. It's about strengthening the resilience of thousands of children. We teach them how to speak up, and we tell them that it's not normal if somebody abuses you. And we tell them how to mobilize their friends and how to mobilize families, communities, and all that. This is a part of how they are mobilizing themselves. We are trying to improve the child protection system together with the government and non-government bodies. Very important. And we try to ensure a safe and child-friendly environment in tourism, so we are trying to, that everybody is following the code, at least as a basis. This is what we did. This is mobilizing people. I didn't know we were doing this. Do you see how many people? Blood, sweat and tears. How did I do it? How did TUI sign this contract, this corporate partnership with Plan for, in the end, 4.5 years? In the beginning it was 3 years, but I want to do it longer, so it will end this year. It was a huge internal battle. It was not an unwilling CEO. The CEO left the 1st of January. I worked 10 years together with him. I know exactly what was possible and not. Now we have a new Belgium CEO. I have to change this guy again. But it was not the unwilling CEO, and it was not the 100,000 euros. It was the thought that I could harm a destination, that people will not book anymore Brazil because they have child sex tourism problem over there. I think, yeah, everybody already knows it, but if I say it out loud, suddenly I'm harming a destination. They will find out anyway when they are there. It's better to tell them up front, but that was not allowed. So what I did is, I said, we really have to do this, believe me, and I will not harm the destination. And they said, I had to, every small text I wrote about this project, it had to go through complete management. I think 6 people had to look at it. And we were only talking about education of girls, never about child sex tourism. But now that changed, because we won the World Responsible Tourism Award. Suddenly, I was the good kid. And it approved. The award approved internally for us, for me, that I was doing the right thing, and suddenly everybody is really proud, but I'm still very careful in what I can communicate towards our customers on child sex tourism. But that was the supply side, so try to get these youngsters, to give them another chance to get out of their situation. But then we also have to stop demand. How do you do that? The code asks us to put something in brochures, to hand over a small flyer, and I told ECPAT Netherlands, I don't want to just give out a flyer. What's the impact of the flyer? It's creating awareness, and we need big impact. So, in 2011, the military police in the Netherlands, they started a campaign about child sex tourism. And I told the girl who was initiating this, next time you want to do a campaign in the airport, ask me to join and I will make it big. That's me. I didn't know if I could do it, but... So what happened in 2012, we were able to start this campaign. The ministry, this is our Ministry of Security and Defense, he opened it, but the thing is that it's the process again. How was it easy to do this? No, if you take a look at the picture, this is most likely impossible to have in other countries. It's very much in your face. You don't have to be able to read Dutch to see what we are trying to show you. And the discussion was with the NGOs and with the ministry and with the military police, is this what we would like to spread towards our guests, towards holiday makers? Because it's not about everybody knows it's 6, 7 year old, you should not touch them. But and this is not the right image. It should be a 15, 16, 7-year-old. That's our holiday maker who should be aware. Well, in the end, we chose this one anyway. And once again, to get to this, perseverance, trust, and friendship. Every time I will tell you friendship. Without friendship, and it will, yeah, you need it. Was the campaign successful? The campaign is not about creating only awareness, because that's the big thing in most of the child sex tourism campaigns. It's just, we would like to create awareness that you can report. or that you should not do this. And then I thought, yeah, we need more. The first campaign the military police did was about this, creating awareness. But what we are trying to do now is we are trying to create awareness and good reports. We need higher quality reporting. That's what's on the back. If somebody sees something, they should write that down and send that to a website or whatever. And were we successful? Yes. In 5 months' time, instead of only 3-4 in a year reports, we got 27 reports. Just by handing this leaflet out and having posters in 3 major airports in the Netherlands, this folder, that's the thing what the ministry is doing, it fits perfectly in a passport. Did you ever get a folder in your passport when you were going through customs? In the Netherlands, it's not, but we managed to get it in because it's the military police sitting there and it's one of our partners. But we got 27 reports in 5 months and 5 good leads to build a case. 5. So it doesn't sound like a lot, but it's 5 more than normally. The campaign costed €25,000 and we decided to do the campaign for the coming 3 years. And do you think there's a coincidence that it's just luck that the ministry is opening this campaign? We will do it again in a few weeks when we have a new campaign starting for the World Soccer in Brazil. What are the responsibilities of tour operators? Just get started, do the code. Secondly, if you're really bored and you have some extra time on your hands and you would really like to change supply and demand, find your allies, find others and put a lot of time in it and start mobilizing your network. Both the projects I showed you are multi-stakeholder. There's always government, police, NGO and travel industry together. Most of these stakeholders are very strong women. I don't know if that's maybe a thing. And we are friends. And it's more, we're on Facebook together than your friends, isn't it? It's not LinkedIn, it's Facebook. We took a look at all stakeholders, and I think the best thing in the projects are we took a look at in Brazil and in the Netherlands about the referral system. So if somebody in Brazil is raped and she goes to an organization to tell I'm raped, people were laughed at. Now that's not anymore the case. In the Netherlands, if you would report somewhere on a website, it would end up with the NGO. That's not anymore going to happen. It now flows into a police system because we're working together with the ministry, and he appointed 100 people to work on child sex tourism. Bring some blood, sweat and tears and create friendship, and success is almost secured. Thirdly, lastly, if you don't know where to get started, there are some promising developments. It's the international campaign about Don't Look Away. They are just in the beginning, but hopefully we can change it for the good, that it's really an international campaign. And a few weeks ago, this website was launched. It's a start. It's not the end. Thank you for your time, and give them a chance.
Elise, thank you. Perseverance, trust, friendship. I think that's one of the characteristics of the Responsible Tourism conferences as well. But thank you very much indeed for that, Elise. Mr. Barr. Mr. Barr, you've got 15 minutes.
Thank you.
You're a notorious rule breaker. Normally I love you for it, but not in here.
Thank you, Harold.
So 15 minutes.
Okay, I have this task of telling you how tourism benefits the poor. Not an easy task at all. But I'll try. By the way, I come from the Gambia. I'm really satisfied that many people refer to the Gambia. That's really good. Not only for the bad, but there is a lot for the good too. We had our independence, quote unquote, in '65. and that coincided with an investor, a Scandinavian investor, coming in to invest in tourism, and our first arrival of tourists were 300. 72, we had a white paper on tourism, and tourism was generally seen as a black gold that will actually liberate us economically. We have only 40 kilometers of beach, by the way, very small, very tiny. The country is 11,000 square kilometers, carved by the British because they wanted to have the river. So, of course, they negotiated with the French to have the river, therefore the size of our country. We speak English and our neighbors speak French, which gives us another added advantage. It's a good thing that we speak English. So it's not all bad that we were somewhat colonized by the Brits. Impacts, of course, because that side of the beach was demarcated as the tourism development area, and there was need to develop that side, which brought about the white paper, and eventually we were advised, as any new developing country, you have to heavily invest in infrastructure so that you can have more tourists or more investors coming in. But of course, this brought about some impacts. That side of the beach, which is demarcated, it's 800 meters from the high water mark all the way. This 40 kilometers of beach was actually taken over by government only for tourism development. Impacts, women rice growers and those who were using that part were actually not using it again. Fisher persons were affected. Communities were not compensated for loss of land. But also something positive came from it. I mean, we had a cluster development in tourism. Not many countries have this, which is an advantage because you actually, to somewhat put tourism within an area. And within the white paper that we had, the advice was, the recommendation was we should make sure that we don't isolate tourists. So what we had was a concept we call the bandula. The bandula is a meeting point between locals and tourists. But then because of the cluster development, what we have is around all the hotels, we have the development of small businesses around it, which were mainly, or up to now, owned by locals, which is a good thing. The other good thing was, of course, tourism actually introduced women into the caste trade, which is good, because if you know a lot about development in a Muslim country, what happened is the women were not meant to be working traditionally. So therefore, what tourism did was actually to bring them in, because a lot of them actually became handicraft persons, and through that, they were introduced to caste trade. Again, craft in the Gambia has a caste interpretation. That means if you're a leather worker, if you are an ironsmith, you belong to a lower part of the caste. But what tourism did, which is great, I think, is actually it brought the craft worker who was by caste lower to a given standard, because he can earn caste through his or her trade and be recognized, which I think is positive. But then, because of heavy investment in infrastructure, we had a financial crisis in 1980. What Europe has today, or Greece, we've experienced it well before. So we are more resilient in actually dealing with such problems. But what you have was A small country investing heavily in tourism meant a lot of that money was to be borrowed from outside. Because in a lot of developing countries, a lot of the development budget is not actually coming from our countries. 80% of our development budget, which means monies that we will use for infrastructural development, is not generated internally. It's actually borrowed from sometimes commercial banks with high interest rates. And the equation there is you are actually increasing poverty, you are accelerating inflation, because there came a time in the 80s where we could not pay anymore, and the IMF had to intervene, and we were given conditions. And it was called the Economic Recovery Program. Little did we know, it was a scheme to actually make us pay our debts, not actually to make our economies recover. The ERP, what it brought in 1985, eventually because of these constraints within the economy, the ERP brought about public sector workers redundant. For the first time, our currency was hooked to the British pound, but for the first time, that link was broken, and we were asked to float our currency, which means it's now operating mainly on demand and supply. And if you are not exporting much, and your currency depends on demand and supply, you know what that means. It means inflation a lot. Back then, in 85, it was $5 say to the pound. Today, ask me how much it is. $65 says to the pound. You can just see the difference. Agricultural subsidies cancelled, normally, naturally. Whilst the whole welfare state in this part of the world depends on subsidizing from the state, and I am told that 40% of the EU budget goes towards subsidizing their farmers, much more. But we were conditioned not to subsidize agriculture, and that shows you the equation in terms of development. Again, government divestiture program was introduced, which means that all those businesses that were run by government was asked to actually get out of it. It's not the business of government to do business. And what that means actually is to streamline. A lot of the workers had to suffer because they were made redundant. The resultant, more dependency on tourism. Yeah, because you don't see a way out in agriculture, which was the dominant force, which was the dominant main stream of the economy. But because of all these conditions, you had to be more dependent on tourism. I am questioned most times, was tourism a better option? And my answer is, this is wasteful thinking, really, and very academic, because that's what we have. If you follow that process, you know this was what we were left with. And therefore, this is what will actually, naturally, a government will conclude that this is what will give us development. I mean, the agriculture, if it is suffering that much, we can't compete with in the European markets, nor can we compete in an American market because of all these subsidies. What we are left with actually is to see tourism as an option. But that brought some new thinking. In 1994, we had a military takeover, common in most African countries. And what the British government did was to issue a travel advice. They had an old colonial boy who was there, and they felt satisfied that that was, going on smoothly. And then they had a disruption, and they said, okay, no more British tourists who travel to the Gambia, when about 50% or more of our tourists were coming from the UK. And that brought about some thinking, even though bad, but it brought about a debate. Is this industry sustainable? An industry we are so much dependent on, is it really sustainable that a foreign country can actually say no, and we don't have any tourists coming? And in 1996, I was part of a campaign looking at fairer trade with VSO. Harold mentioned that yesterday, and that's how I came to know Harold. And in 1999, I was at the United Nations, and the CSD7, for the first time, tourism was discussed at the United Nations. The good thing that came out of that is I invited Harold to come to the Gambia for a discussion on how best to take tourism forward and to look at sustainability. And ASSET, the Association of Small-Scale Enterprises, was formed, mainly looking at informal sector and small business enterprises, the development, mainly looking at market access. From that came up from a conference we had with all the small enterprises. We brought out an agenda for change, conflicts of interest between small, medium-sized, and bigger industries, because tourism is highly dominated by big industries, tour operators. There is a conflict of interest here, even between the hotels and the small enterprises that are within the cluster. How can the poor better access the market? How can linkages be improved? Training, licensing, that was an issue. Insurance requirements. Formal sector, how can they participate? To see the informal sector not as enemies, not competing aggressively against them, but to actually know that they will help the industry eventually. Respect for the informal and small businesses was key in that drive. And we started, after ASSET was formed, actually we saw a lot of good things coming out from that. Because in 2000, ASSET came up and rallied all the small informal businesses, mainly looking at training, so that they can be more competitive in the market, looking at product development, looking at other aspects so that these small enterprises and informal sector enterprises can actually thrive. It took us 11 years for government to really act, and 2011, government acted, which is really, really good. A lot of those informal sector enterprises that we have been campaigning on their behalf is now recognized by government as formal businesses, which is really good. So all those fruit sellers, juice pressers on the beach now have got formal businesses lined up around the beaches with uniforms, with badges, licensed by government, and operating legal businesses. And for the first time, we've got Schedule B ground operations companies coming up, which means before what we had is big four companies, or big five now, that are running ground operations. But now it's somewhat liberalized so that even small guiding companies are now having licenses to operate small ground operating companies, which is really helping. RT projects, we have since then initiated with the Travel Foundation. No one can convince me that big tour operators can't make a change. I've gone through it with them. And I'm happy to say, Thomas Cook, TUI, I worked with all of them through the Travel Foundation and really measuring, actually giving figures. I don't have time to go into detail, but measuring and monitoring the impact their intervention is having within communities and really making a change. We have since then, there are many projects that we have done, but we have since then done a Gambia is Good project, which is linking local vegetable producers to the hotels so that they are able to sell directly to the hotels. We've done an excursion, routes excursion, where now we have introduced a gate fee, which means any tourist going to that excursion pays a fee towards community development, towards the employment of local people within the community, and for community development. We have now got the Guaranteed Gambian Craft Project, which is actually looking at the craft side to link it to the tourism industry, supported mainly by Thomas Cook. So there is some change happening out there. Moving forward, I will say motivated and dedicated individuals can make things happen. Participation of government and tour operators is key. Stakeholder support. Mass tourism can make bigger impacts in terms of economic returns. Trade and business, not charity. Bottom-up and top-down, we have been confusing the bottom-up approach, but I think from my experience we need a top-down approach too, because without government regulation and without government help, sometimes most things cannot do. We have seen, I'm not a big fan of certification, but the travel life is making a good impact. It's actually making hotels to change in what they're doing. Those hotels that want to have the travel life certificate are really making sure that they are looking towards the supply chain to make a difference. Challenges, we still have them, as everything. Tourism is changing, and therefore the need to catch up is actually taking time. I don't have much time. You can actually read it through the website. Thank you.
Adama, thank you very much. Martin, I'm not sure I've told you this, but that change that really wouldn't have happened if you'd not been in the Gambia with us at that original workshop. I should have mentioned, Martin. Yeah, it was a very interesting example of how a strategic intervention, just those 3 days, made an enormous difference to the willingness of the local industry to accept that it could change. Still took 10 years, but it's happened, and it's a really big step forward for the Gambia. It's been incredible to watch somebody who I first met when I think he'd just become an official tour guide. He's now a small ground operator and licensed formally within the government. And change takes time, and we come back to what Elise said, you know, perseverance, trust, friendship are fundamental to those processes of change. And for me, it's really important that one of the characteristics of these conferences is exactly that, the willingness of people to stick together and to make the change over a number of years.